Hi, Hank, Ole, Ray, Rich. Good to see you.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm doing good.
Perfect.
Hi there.
Hey, Hank.
Early, but
What time is it for you?
it's 8 a.m.
Oh, okay. That's
But,
okay, right?
get my cobwebs out of my head here. Not super early, not crazy early.
We get you going, huh?
Well, it's pretty warm night, so we keep our windows open here, and we had a skunk last night that blew off a pretty strong one, and so we had to. That sort of interrupted the sleep. Had to close all the windows and take defensive actions.
So I'm trying to find the meeting minutes from last week. Because
There we go.
it contains the agenda for this week. John is a little bit late, I guess. This is for today. Sorry about that. Give folks a few minutes. 8:14. Okay, good. I'm doing the scribing again. Now I know why I don't see the meeting minutes, because I haven't imported them yet. Okay, that's the reason. Okay. So today we are going to talk about the feed structure. The plan was scrappy, emulator, and then open issues. So a couple of items. You can click on the note-taking tool to see what's going on. Okay, that's good. I will deal with that later. Let me ping my co-chair.
We are pretty sparsely populated today. So
yeah, what's the reason? Is there anything special going on?
in the US, Europe, I don't know of. No, yes, maybe.
Ray, is there something in the US?
Not really. It's school has started, and I'm thinking it seems like maybe people are still thinking it's summer sometimes. I know next weekend is Memorial Day, or is it Labor Day? Labor Day. Monday is Labor Day, so that's a federal holiday. So that today, though, I'm surprised. I think, as you were saying, maybe still some people are trying to squeeze in their summer vacation or something.
Yeah, that's possible. Hey, John.
Hey, Hannah, sorry about that. Yeah, it's a vacation here in the UK for sure. I've been trying to find Wi-Fi that is also not on holiday. So good to be here.
Good. Yeah, we have Ori dialing in, so that's good too. should we wait 1 more minute or should we get started? John, I created the outline or the template for the meeting minutes, and the first topic is the feed structure discussion. So Ori is now on the call. So should we start with that one?
Yeah, let's do that. I want to make sure that gets done, especially as it's kind of the main piece that I'm working on with the API definition as well. So I think that's a great place to start.
Blocking the API.
Yeah.
Do you want to sort of get us up to speed, like where we are with that issue?
Yep, can do. So I'll give an intro, then hopefully Ori can speak to some progress, and Steve. I think Steve is not here today, so we may have to postpone again. But essentially, what we found from the 117 work and trying to sort of maintain our minimal status as building block providers and format specifiers, but not stray too far into the sort of big systems or semantic inference space, meaning we don't know what's inside the payload, so it's kind of hard to search for them. We need to have some way of locating the documents, artifacts and receipts and things that we've made, and identifying if we've got the same one as we requested, and all sorts of things like that. So it became apparent that explicit feed specification is necessary. We have to have, at the very least, an identifier format for them, and probably some kind of very minimal structure for how a feed is actually represented, returned, potentially searchable. So that's what we set off to do. And there's been some discussion on the SCITT Slack channel about some of these issues. And as I've got a couple of folks, the same guys who did the work for 116 in my team are now building up a new kind of more robust version of that. And we found the same issue that almost everything is well specified. We can do everything with Cozy as it stands. There's a couple of things that we'll need to build into stuff like allowed tree identifiers and things like that. So there's some work to do, but it's already sort of straightforward and fits into existing IETF documents and formats. But the one thing that's really interesting is how we manage user specified feeds. So right now, there's things like the user gets to choose what the feed ID is, but then it has to be treated as unique. So that has some interesting challenges as far as sort of eventual consistency and things go. And also being able to know if a user chosen feed on one transparency service is sort of morally the same or not morally the same. We need to have the interplay between issuer IDs, feed IDs, transparency service IDs, and indeed a whole bunch of other metadata, and have a consistent approach to how that works. So for all of these many reasons, the feed structure and the way that we structure the identity of feeds so that they can be specified for write and read and verify has become the sort of blocking conceptual issue on getting the API sort of done and the scrappy document in a decent draft state. So I think that's the state of the nation, and hopefully some folks, Ori, I know you've done quite a bunch of work. Steve has as well, but he's not here, so he can't say things. So I'll pass it back to the floor for any status or input on that.
John, is there something written down on the feed structure already? Or like I have a hard time sort of like understanding like what you could really specify here, because SCITT is in some sense very generic, and so it's a little tricky to say. Like for example, I could imagine that the feed would be different for something describing an artifact describing software versus something that is, for example, hardware based. Ori.
So what we want to do, well, Ori will probably say a better version of what I'm about to say, but there is nothing written down right now other than that the feed ID is mandatory in the protected header of the request. And so I think we were trying to get away with simply having an identity that says, well, I want to write to the same logical list of assertions. And that's all we have written down so far. But the worry was, coming out of a bunch of conversations at 117, that's not enough. So the whole point of having this exercise and this discussion and focusing on it for the next sort of 2 or 3 weeks of these interims is to see, can we actually get away with just an identifier, or do we have to specify some minimal, and I mean minimal, metadata or data structure to allow you to express this is a software artifact feed or this is a something else feed. That's the open question.
Okay, Ori?
Yeah, so I think what we need to get the tests to the point where the tests can check for the presence of the feed identifier in the places where it's expected. It can come back on the signed receipt. So, I'm giving you a receipt for a signed statement. The receipt contains a feed identifier in its protected header. That's one place it can come. Also, and this is a thing that I'd love for folks to give better guidance on, but the feed can also be in the protected header of the signed statement. Is it allowed in both of those places? Is feed a thing receipts, or is feed a thing that can go on any signed statement? So, but once we've added feed to those places in the API, we can have registration policies that require the feed be a specific string, and we can have checks on the transparent statements there value. That's it.
So, Ori, can't we just sort of pick one of those? It's one of those places where to put the feed content and just go with it. It doesn't. To me, it sounds like irrelevant on where we put the stuff. Or am I missing something?
Well, just to respond, like the header parameter needs to be there, and there needs to be a way, certainly on the receipt, but it's pretty straightforward to do that. And we've been kind of hand waving around all the complexity that you might see in feeds by just saying this value could be really complicated. It could be a URI, it could be a CURI, it could have all of these details inside of it. And so it specifies something related to the feed coming back out on the signed transparent statement. I think it's going to be easy to make progress.
Okay. Ray.
Okay, so I have a little diagram here. Let me see. Video on?
Yeah, video's on.
Oh, can you see me? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I don't see it. All right. So I guess it doesn't matter if I see it. Oh, that's because I'm on here. All right. Let me just.
But
okay.
we can see you just fine.
Okay. You can see this. Okay.
Yep.
So let's see. All right. So way over here, I have divided this up. So here's the product, and there's suppliers that are feeding into this product, and then it goes on. So this is one stage of a supply chain. All right, and then we have a bunch of documents.
Right?
Can you see it? Yeah.
Almost, probably left third of the screen we can't see. So if you could just turn the camera a little bit.
All right, there we go.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
So products and suppliers going into the box. So this is the product here. And so then there's a documentation about the product, right? So we have what we've been working with is the bill of materials. That's all of the stuff that goes in. Usually there's an approved vendor list or whatever they call it. Where can you buy this stuff from? How do you fabricate it? Fabrication instructions. That could be a whole bunch of stuff there. How does it get tested? This is all about the product, like how is it created? Now, this is all for software. It's a digital product, so it's all kind of put into this thing, although the test instructions usually aren't in there. But how it gets installed, and the bill of materials is in there, but that's kind of made after the fact. You know, so the actual like container of OCI container has all the instructions for how it gets installed. But a hardware product would have a bunch of other, maybe a whole lot more than this here, different documents, right, that are in the documentation level. And sometimes at this level, there's also a digital product, right, which is something that we're actually going to, because software is a digital, it's digital, so we can also process it the same way as any of the documentation. Then there's this other level here, which is the product description, which is the level that Dick was working with. It's kind of a vendor response file where if you want to provide information about your product, you might have to provide this bigger chunk here, which maybe has a public information in there, level, and private. I'm thinking that sometimes not all of this is exposed, and there may be a lot more than what I'm saying here, but just the idea of documentation, and then idea of wrapping it up for people to have. And the reason it gets wrapped up is because at any point in time, you say, bang, this is my product. And that's the thing right there that describes it to whoever you're talking to. And that's the thing that Dick was saying he needed, because like you're working with the Food and Drug Administration, they want to know, okay, what is your product and what is it describing? Maybe it is just a bomb. Okay, maybe that's all you have to provide. But then there's this level here, which we're getting past this documentation where we get, and I'm not sure, but we get some hashes of this at each one of these, and we have signed statements and receipts from SCITT here working together of what these things are. I'm kind of wondering, maybe you guys would know, like, where are these stored? Are they stored with this? Are they stored with this part? Are they stored, where are they stored? I don't quite understand how someone would use these. But then eventually gets into SCITT here, where we're signing each one of these, right? I guess, and that would be the feed. I mean, if the way people are visualizing it, but there may be in each one of these SCITT things, as we're saying, I think it has to be the product ID of some kind here and an entity that is doing it. The rest can be fuzzy.
Ray,
but,
I think Roy wants to answer your question. Roy, is that correct?
Yeah. So let me stop and not talk too long. But that's where I was sort of trying to visualize what I was thinking about. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ray. So every document that for the use case, of course, gets signed and then ends up with a counter receipt from the SCITT the ledger. I think those all get stored in a storage subsystem, and that's where your query engine runs against anyway. I agree with you. And I was talking to Steve Lasker about this last week, that the composition of asking whether a product is okay or not.
Sorry.
Is, unless we're careful, we'll end up with so many round trips that will just saturate the network. So having either a cached value or a cached evaluation of the statements, the way they're doing software supply chain with SBOMs and everything else, becomes an interesting question. In the way we wrote the original proposal for COSI was that the receipt is returned as part of the signed statement that comes back from the SCITT registry. There's an open question as to whether they're stored together or and stapled in the storage subsystem, or kept apart and then stapled together on return, due to the fact that receipts potentially could expire over time, and you could ask for a refreshed receipt, which gets into this question of how do you keep freshness and so forth. The identity, though, problem has already been dictated by the SBOM ID that they've created to allow you to hook SBOMs to other SBOMs. So I think that is your version product instance identifier for your software. As to whether a software has a list of IDs to deal with architecture specific things like the OS for ARM64 versus AMD64 versus Intel versus whatever, what SKU, those would come out of a product catalog. So there isn't necessarily a one-to-one product to ID in all cases. There could be product to multiple IDs that match your architecture, your hardware. But the claims and the SBOMs and what the dependencies are and the VEXs and the CVEs are architecture potentially specific, and therefore it is a join that's done inside the SCITT subsystem, not in the ledger. That makes sense?
Well, I think so. I think you were saying to me that maybe like once we get like this product description, sometimes I think people are going to want to put that into a big chunk and give it to someone else. And they're going to want to put everything in there so they can hand it to someone else. And
yeah, but the problem here is the way that the federal government.
Wait a second. There's nothing in there except for references to the documentation and references to SCITT receipts. There's nothing in here.
The identity, the document that Dick was putting out there,
yeah, kind
of exists today from where it wraps potentially an SBOM ID. There is this concept of, do you take a sellable product and it points at, here's the current versions of the product. Yeah, I get that. As to bundling it all up, there's always freshness problem of CVEs are supposed to be newest and latest. So you're always going to have to go back to the well, which is why I was thinking potentially that SCITT's architectures as we go and build them up will be more like DNS servers, where your SCITT instance at your firewall will act as a proxy to the public ones, or potentially the CVE vendors or the anti-malware vendors, and staple it together and give you time to live on the results.
Okay, so you're bringing up the issue of if we did make this product or vendor response file, he called it, and give it to our customer, basically, I guess is what's happening. It's not really customer, it's the FDA. So they're saying, I need to supply to you regulating agency, all of this stuff, and they're going to put in there what they need for that particular agency for their product that period of time, and get approval for it. And then whatever their policies are in terms of, if you make a new product, sometimes you can't do that. There is no freshness idea. You have to lock it into permanent. But
I agree, but
you have to do a new thing. Go ahead.
The way I was thinking of that is that SCITT, they would have a local SCITT instance on their firewall. Their endorsement from their auditors control and apply to their view of the world. And whether there's something they take offline outside of SCITT, that's an interesting question, or whether it's just an offline SCITT instance that keeps it consistent as to whether they're intermittently online or not. The FDA is big enough that I suspect they're going to have their own internal SCITT storage subsystem, and they're going to do their endorsements and their snapshotting of, here's the versions we have installed. I'll let maybe Hank wants to jump in here.
I would like to jump in here.
Because sorry, Hannah, go ahead.
I think the FDA case is interesting because at least in my reading, they didn't explain on how they are going to use that information or whether that will be made available to anyone and so on and so on. So it's basically so far it looks more to me like a one-way communication. Vendors send the stuff over to them, or am I wrong? Am I misreading CITT?
No,
I think-
normally, well, it depends, but I think a lot of times it's going to become public.
I think what the FDA and all the other government agencies are doing are saying, hey, here's the idea of what we want. You tell us the best way to make this happen. They're looking for ideas. They're not dictating.
I think they are still also in search for like community or sort of industry feedback on how they would best make use of this. I guess that's a way to formulate it. But if they obviously, then they have a lot of choice. And one way is obviously to register the sign statements as we do it within the ledger, but then store the rest of the information in some adjacent database where you pointed to. But
so my understanding is that there's really no requirement for authentication on those documents right now. It's simply a submission that you'd make as part of a document package for your, say it's a device you want approval for that device, and the FDA has to go out and do a bunch of things, and they require a bunch of prerequisites, and among them are many documents, and one of them would be an SBOM, for example. Another might be a consumer labeling, data structure, but there's no requirement for authentication at all. It's just it's assumed to be authentic when it comes from the vendor.
Yeah, but I also think they're basically pointing the point. We need it immutable, and you need to stand behind your word. Without a digital signature, how would they do that? Right.
Well, I mean, but the practical matter is, I think it's it's a correspondence between two entities, and it's emailed or it's uploaded into an FDA website from an authorized person, and that's how the authenticity is. I guess it's not authenticated, but it's assumed authentic because of a bunch of security controls over the process.
The question I have there, Charlie, is how, considering they want the CVEs and the VEXs and the SBOM tree of what you're dependent upon to also be visible without having a distribution system, you're going to get into this. How do you keep live? How do I publish CVEs? How do I publish VEXs? And the disconnected one-shot model is counter to what they're talking about.
True, but I think again, we're going to have to make a case for stronger authentication, because right now, false positives and pirating of that stuff has really not been an issue at all. It's conceivable, of course, that it could be down the road, but right now there's no use case that says, oh, we've really got a problem here, we need something to fix it, and skit to the rescue. So
but I think it would be good if we design a system that it has at least a kind of a minimum security, and I think the bar today is kind of at the level of digital signatures, rather than just sending something just plain text as it is. I'd assume that there would be some other magic.
Let me.
Hopefully there will be, but right now I think you basically get a login.gov or whatever the thing is, and then you are assigned a bunch of role-based access, and then you simply upload your documents. And
that's a different model. And of course, worthwhile to talk about specifically because it's not an unauthenticated channel. It's just security at a different level or layer.
Right.
Because there you're kind of giving people credentials for the authentication using that TLS channel to the website, rather than having them giving them, let's say, a public-private key pair to do something. Of course, that's indeed a topic that would be worthwhile to debate. It's an architectural design decision. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I guess just my point is that right now they have a system that they think works, Of course, if you had a concerted effort to thwart it, sure they'd have a problem. But right now there hasn't been that. So we need to do two things. I think one is to make SCITT as easy as the default, right? And then the second is to make the case that this is a sort of a proactive way of heading off possible attacks in the future. And right now, I think that's just not there yet.
Where do you think CISA and NIST are in this, considering they really want online real-time information? That it kind of runs counter to the old FDA or the old model of you download the documents, you're good to go forevermore.
Yeah. No, I'm not. I guess I agree. I think CISA, well, CISA especially, NIST less so, but I think there's just a zeal now for upgrading all the different systems that are out there that have kind of been, to use the term I used before, assumed secure, and actually, make sure that they really are.
The counterpoint to that, though, Charlie, is I spent time with Dave Waltermeyer at the last IETF meeting, 2 hours of talking about CVEs, and he's going, maybe we just push the CVE publication to be a SCITT compliant query and just all folds in. So even they are moving their model. They were trying to figure out how to bind it to product, and I said you should just abide by the SBOM and the identifier there. And Ray, you were part of that conversation for a while. It was happening behind you and at the hackathon. And so we have an opportunity to get them all in alignment. I think the FDA is just trying to draft behind what's live.
Yeah, I mean, I concur. I think that makes sense. But NIST is sort of theoretical and CISA is practical. And both of them are prescriptive, and the agency has to then go implement things. So obviously a uniform and someone else pays for it solution from CISA would be terrific for all these agencies. So I think that would be, I mean, that is certainly a great use case for SCITT. I do think, though, that there is a chasm to hurdle here before we get to the point where people say, oh, yeah, this is really needed. And this added complexity is necessary, right? Which I personally think it is, but not, but it's a marketing program right now.
Where I struggle with this, and what Dick has been pushing on, he's looking for a product, and it's the query and storage subsystem that Ray is getting into, which is over and above what our current charter is, and proposing the solution to all these different organizations is fine. And I think it should happen. The question is this the venue? Should we take this on and try to expand our charter is what I struggle with. I've been trying to keep them separate, but maybe now is the time to have that discussion.
Okay, so let me, well, Hank, why don't you go before I say anything?
Sorry, is it my turn?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a little bit surprised that we are, but I think they're somehow related. All these things like using the whole system, we started with feeds and we ended up with authentication somehow. And I think that's fine, because I assume that the consumer, the consumer is now a bad term, the users of the system that would include SCITT building blocks has these two things, like is this authentic? Am I rightfully authenticated? And is this the thing I want by the feed somehow connected in that API scope? And so I assume the movement from feed to authentication is kind of intuitive for most. Having said that, the NIST contribution to CVE is a little bit more than ephemeral since the last IETF. We have talked to a friend of Dave Waltermeyer, AJ Stein, and he will start mid of September his efforts of providing a example data set based on the NVD, so we can understand how feeds would look like in that scope. Because he thought it was a little bit of a academic exercise to understand how the structure of the feeds look like if you don't have all the data. and the NVD has a lot of data. And so he was maybe he indicated that that this just doing the exercise of running a transparency service with the NVD data in it is a good exercise, and he would attribute time to that. And I would agree that this is an interesting finger exercise. In the end, actually, it could be how CVE.org works. Who knows? But as my glass orb is a little bit cloudy, I'd only say it's very useful to understand how a structured feed that is more than a character array looks like. And I think that's the interesting point for me still, because when people talk about structured feeds, or I think it's more than a byte array or more than a string array. I think it's probably something like a nested structure, a hierarchical thing, like topics and subtopics, as we know from PubSub broker, right? And maybe something like that. So, and we have to find out what the default topics, or is everybody making up their own hierarchy of topics, or is it even a thing? Are we compressing it into a uniform identifiers that are just one layer still, or concatenate them, which I would of course do not recommend to do. But I think that's the thing I'm thinking about when we're talking about feeds, and so I wanted to bring that back to the topic here. I hope that's fine.
Yeah, Hank, that's very good. So I just looked at the API document and also at the architecture document, and so far the API document doesn't talk anything about feed, but the architecture document, as you know, like briefly talks about feed in context of an additional parameter in the header, in the protected header. And currently it's just defined as a string. And what I hear from you is like, we don't know right now whether we need a structure, or whether at the level of SCITT it would be useful to have a structure for that feed. So in that sense, it sounds to me like the best way forward is to assume that there's this header, this feed header, and the API just assumes that there's some unstructured data, or at least a structure that we don't know, and we just use that. Do you agree with me?
I think Ori has an opinion, so I will use the floor just in a second. But I think we should start there, because we can use, I don't know, string concatenation and do everything we want there in a string, for starters. And if you find out, oh, this is getting complex, maybe we need more structure to the value, then we can add value here by introducing other values in a string. But it feels to me that it's okay to start with that, because otherwise we are not starting. So, but Ori.
Ori.
I think we want some structure beyond just a string. And the reason for that is we expect feeds to be an interoperability point. And so we expect sharing of feed identifiers to be an important part of the workflow and the context in which SCITT is used. So we think, based on the IETF, I would say we think that feed should be a URL, potentially encoded in a compact form. But we don't think it should just be any arbitrary string. We don't think it should be graph database queries, in base64 URL encoded or anything like that, which people will do if we don't say what kind of interoperability you should expect on the field. And I think right now we expect you to be able to process it as a URL. That's it.
But the URL, like today, if I think about software, so let's imagine I want to search for a specific software artifact. That is not necessarily described in the form of a URL.
It's true, but if you're navigating any search interface related to software, you are navigating URLs. So packages are not, always identified with URLs, but still the feed structure having some defined behavior is important. In particular, it's important if feeds are going to be exposed on a REST API, then you kind of expect that the feed is the REST API might also document. So I think if we don't say, hey, they're URLs, we're making our API documentation not very useful or usable, and we're destroying a potential interoperability point. So I would be opposed to saying that a feed can be any arbitrary thing. I would say it needs to be a URL, and ideally it needs to be a URL that is defined, at least some version of support for that URL is defined at least once in the SCITT API. That's it.
Okay. Thanks, Ori. Hank, do you want to add something to that?
Oh no, sorry, I'm still just in queue. Sorry.
Okay, Ray.
Let me. Okay, thank you. I was gathering all that in, and I think, because I can't actually make this diagram all by myself. I don't know enough to do it, but I have trouble identifying where the feed is. And you could say it's here, like you take all the, this is a low-level API, which is pretty much what we're talking about so far, and it's fine. And there we're wondering if we should put a couple of things in the header, and maybe, you know, that would be fantastic. But really, the use case that we see happening, and I see, is where you have a given entity that's in charge of a product. In my case, it's election department, right? And they've got all their election data, and then nothing much is going to happen to it after that. That just gets exposed. So that, but in any software product or other product, you have a bunch of documentation you want to expose. It could be just hashes of these documents, right? So this is a description of these documents. They're not in there. They're just describing the documents that are involved. And this is stored, these are stored or available somewhere else, probably with your, but then the product description, the way I see it, is combined with all the receipts. And that's the thing that you would then hand to someone, whatever format it is. So if the FDA says, we have this format you must comply with, and we go, okay, that's fine. We've got all of these receipts that we have for either this entire thing, we can submit it, or the individual items within there that may be part of it already. But the signed statement and the receipts would go back probably to be combined here. Now, the way Dick had it, which I don't quite agree with, is at least the way they had the structure of the thing, is that they put the entity sort of inside the product description, inside this file here, which you could do, but it needs to be at a different level. But basically, that would be part of these receipts here, because that's going to, these receipts, I think, provide all the information that you need to go and validate this stuff up here. At least that's what you'd like. You'd like to have, I mean, I'm just talking, you know, blank slate, forget about SCITT. What do we need? We have a bunch of product descriptions. We need receipts to say, these are right. This stuff up here, I've got a receipt for every damn thing in it. And itself too, perhaps. I just don't know what it is. Now, where is the feed? I was thinking when I first started that the feed was this low-level API just gushing out.
Well, I can explain that, at least from my understanding. It's like you have the feed showing up in two places. The first one is when the issuer submits or registers the signed statement. It has this. It includes the feed as a parameter in the header, and then so that's when uploading to SCITT, to the SCITT database. But then there's the other part where users of the SCITT system use the API. The API is the other document that that was posted into the chat window somewhere at the beginning of the call, where these users or consumers make lookups, but they need to make lookups based on something, and what they use is the feed information to look up for a specific product, artifact, or whatever. That's sort of like different interfaces in some sense. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, but I think that now the way things are tending to look is that that this low-level API is not going to have that capability, and it's going to end up the searching for stuff is going to end up basically looking at these things that whoever it is wants to make public. So
Right.
if you are the FDA and someone has provided this crap that you want here, then you have receipts for it that says this is endorsed, it's from this party, and so forth. You go check on it, and this is somehow in the receipts it has to say this is the SCITT thing that you can go and check on. This, everything is right. That's the level there where definitely people are going to want to be able to search through the FDA. It's already set up.
That's a good question, and in some sense, it's a question for us to make a decision on, like in the Hank calls it the Scrappy API, whether that Scrappy API is indeed what you describe here as the low-level API that doesn't actually have any feed information, because it's just the interface used for sort of low-level tasks, as you write it on the screen.
Well, it would still
and
have
then
the
there's
product.
a separate. Say again.
It would still have a product ID though. Like if that's what product ID. If we want to start calling that the feed, then I'm okay with that. I think it's good.
Okay. Well, like,
I don't think people are going to want to subscribe to that. I don't think they're going to want to subscribe to just a mess of. Maybe they will, and then you can. I don't think that like this coming out at this low-level API, just a gushing feed, which I think of everything comes out. You want to subscribe to it, you get everything in the world. You don't want those like Twitter, right? You pass it up and go, I'm not interested in that post.
But look at the Ray, look at the API document, and for example, it has currently the following APIs in there. There's a register sign statement, and then it has a receive operation status. I think that is just a way to get the transparent receipt back. The retrieve sign statement. Hank or Ori, help me. What is the receive operation status again?
Sorry, the receipt or the receive?
So,
sorry, Ori.
I think he's asking why is it that getting a receipt could be a long-running or asynchronous operation. It could be that the ledger batches things and that it's not synchronous to produce a receipt.
Okay, so you do so you do a register sign statement, and then maybe it says it returns a message that it takes longer, and then you double check the status and you do a couple of retrieve operation status, and when it's done, registered, then you follow with a retrieve sign statement. No, that can't be true, because the sign statement.
I think you have a hanging HTTP request or whatever to do async here. The batching problem to me is more useful for a system that wants to gate storage onto their database, waiting for the receipt to come back. Right? You're going to append a whole bunch of operations on a very busy system and come back with batches and say, okay, now that I have a receipt, I'll store these. Until that happens, the transaction can't even start against the database. Right? So those are where the async behavior is super useful. I don't think end customers potentially will know on the reading side the asynchronous nature. It's only about submission portions.
Yeah, I think it has to be completed before it becomes transparent. I mean, you when you're submitting this and until it becomes completed, then it's not there. That's inside baseball. Yeah. Once you get out here to this, all of these, the receipt I view as sort of an endorsement to this thing here that somebody like Dick can put on the end of whatever file it is, and then they're happy. Then they say, okay, this thing, but realize then that this is one level of a supply chain, right? And they've got this thing here, and then when you put these all together, the next guy may want to suppress all this, or he may want to allow, if it's suppressed in his bill of material, he doesn't care about this level of stuff. Right. He's using this as just one thing in his larger product. But if you want to dig into it, then you can. That's the question then. If you have one level up here with specifying this, okay, now I know about this thing. How do I get to essentially, how do I get to this with the receipts on?
That's exactly the feed discussion, and like if you look at the APIs, those I think would really qualify as low-level APIs. So there's no feed in there. And for what it's worth, I believe what you call in the API the retrieve sign statement is actually not the sign statement; it's the transparent statement.
Well, they're signed first and then transparent. So they come in, and maybe there's two levels here, but these are all signed. These are all signed, and these are transparent, right?
Well, I think it's a terminology issue, but my reading of the architecture document is the sign statement that is submitted by the issuer is then returned with a counter signature and the receipt, which makes it a transparent statement. And right?
Okay, so I'll put both of those in that block. So that's
right. Is that true?
Yeah, the way the original architecture was written is the receipt is solely returned to out of the ledger. The fact that when you query it to get back the transparent statement, they all come back as 3. We gave a way to represent it and store it as the receipt inside the cozy signature. If you have a detached signature, now they've got 3 separate documents. I think that's over and above the ledger. The ledger may not even see the document, it may only see a detached signature and return a receipt. You want to minimize the amount of network traffic. There's no sense of returning the signed statement back to the caller. He's the one that gave it to you.
But that's not the way how it's described in the architecture document.
What is described in the architecture document is how to store it back on the cozy messages. It never said whether the ledger returned it stapled together or not, because of this other problem we had of you could age out receipts and have to come back for your refreshed receipts. Unless I remember something wrong out of the document that Cedric wrote.
So what do we want to return? Do we want to return? So do we only want to return the receipt?
Look, in the case of publishing or some of these other documents where I'm sending things up, there's no sense, some of the SBOMs are pretty beefy documents. There's no sense to round trip them that the caller had it to begin with. Right?
No, that's understandable. And I understand that with the sort of the sign statement doesn't need to contain the SBOM directly embedded inside. That's good for me.
But even the way it's written is, here's how we're going to store it back in the cozy receipt. There's no sense returning the signed, the detached signature itself if we're just saying, here's how you could staple the 2 of them together. And there's this open question that Ori and I were talking about last week, which is when we were talking to one of the government agencies for physical supply chain, you could end up with multiple receipts, and that's a future discussion, like one for each nationality. They don't trust the same ledger subsystem. There's no sense returning them all.
That's a good point. So there may be different receipts here. The product description could be the same, and you could get a different receipts from a different SCITT things, or maybe line them up here if you have more than one.
And Ori's been in this space a lot longer than I have, so he's in the queue. So I'm going to defer to him.
Okay, certainly more longer than me.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said. You just remember that when you're making a signed statement transparent, you're adding a receipt to the unprotected header for it. You might add to the unprotected header in the future. So that's the concept of this signed statement's been made transparent with separate transparency services. But in general, when communicating service, you're submitting the signed statement that you'd like registered. They're evaluating the policy, which could include checking for the presence of specific headers in that signed statement. So that the transparency service could have requirements around the metadata that you provide along with the signature over the file or whatever it is. And then once they've finished that, they're going to go construct their inclusion proof, and they're going to package their inclusion proof receipt, and they're going to return that receipt to you. It's possible that in some systems, the client and the server might be able to coordinate to make that exchange of information even faster. But the point, I guess, is that the receipt needs to be combined with a signed statement to get to the transparent statement at the end. And if the client is sending that signed statement all the way up, they definitely don't need the server to return it to them. And they might not even need to send that whole signed statement up. They could actually send a reference to the server, and the server could go get the thing and say, okay, I'm okay with it at this time. So it's just important to, remember that there's the client sending the data up, the server is generating one or more receipts and making them available to the client. And I would say the client is the one assembling these things for an API that is also acting as a kind of client, and assembling these things and furthering, sending them. In our architecture today, the thing you get back and you send is a signed statement. We don't specify any more advanced APIs for returning a combination of the signed statement and the receipt, or other artifacts related to the signed statement, plus the signed statement and a receipt. But you can imagine those cases might exist. Maybe a software vendor is storing their artifacts right next to storing their ledger, and they're produced, with a signature and a transparent, all in one sort of experience. But that would be a different product API, something higher order than the API we're looking at.
We have to wrap up because we are running up to the full hour here.
Okay, so I think
John
that
and I
this
have to leave.
model is useful. Maybe I will, after putting it on the chalkboard here, sorry, whiteboard, I'll put this into a graphic so we can talk about it some more. But I don't think this changes really the low-level interface. What you just said, Ori, I agree with that the higher level interface is probably up here. But given that Dick was pointing out that these sort of requirements that you have to comply with, and then if there's some way to make this receipt for whatever it is you're providing, and it sounds like a reference to the SCITT instance, so we can go back and check on them, would be this block right here is kind of like the interface. It's sort of like a little bit meta interface, if you will, where we don't care what happens, but in terms of the receipts and the reference to the SCITT instance, and what that has to be part of the receipt, so that you can every receipt has if you get a receipt from a store, it says the store name at the top. You got to have the SCITT instance identified as to who produced the receipt, and that I don't think is currently part of a receipt. Okay, thank you. I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. We have another call next Monday, and please write this up, or the drawing. And you also have another action item to work with Dick on the VRF, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah,
I'm working.
John, maybe you can write up something about the feed based on the discussion today. That would be helpful, and I will try to advance my PR that I have.
Hannes, John dropped out, is offline.
Okay, yeah. We're up to the full hour, so maybe because of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you all for joining. Dimitri, I saw your message too late. Thanks for being here, and thanks for everyone else. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.